right, thanks for joining us for some bonus material. I'm Will Dodson. I'm a co-editor with Chris Woofter of American Twilight, the cinema of Tobe Hooper, available at University of Texas Press. And I'm talking with Scout Tafoya, author of Cinemophagy, on the psychedelic and classical style of Tobe Hooper. A couple of weeks ago, we did a live stream featuring Joe Bob Briggs and Stan Giese and Julian Banzon and Chris Woofter. We talked about a lot of things, but we also didn't talk about a lot of things. So tonight we're going to kind of get together and shoot the breeze about Tobe Hooper, explore some of the minutia of Hooper's career, some of the maybe less well-regarded films, along with his best known, and just kind of see what happens. So Scout, thanks for making the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me and for having me back. I'm always down to talk about this. This is one of those ones that you can't shut me up about. So at least we're recording it and getting some use out of it.
I don't know. We won't be able to shut you up, but we'll edit out parts that we don't. But anyway, one of the things you talk about in the introduction of your book is just how few serious and comprehensive works there have been about Tobe Hooper. Almost everything that has been written has been about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or about Poltergeist. Your book, which actually beat ours to the market by a couple months, is the first like truly comprehensive. John Kenneth Muir's Eaten Alive at a Chainsaw Massacre covered his career up to point. Our book covers his entire career as well. Why don't we start with some of the TV work? One of the folks in our live chat asked about Body Bags, the triptych that Hooper co-directed with John Carpenter. Hooper's segment was called I, starring Mark Hamill and Twiggy. What are your thoughts on that film, its thematics, its style, its significance to Hooper's career?
It was, I love that project, not necessarily even because I think it's either Carpenter or Hooper's best work. I think obviously even they would have told you that it was, it was a fun exercise more than it was meant to be a sort of comprehensive stylistic gauntlet, or however you want to describe their best work. But I loved it because, I mean, you could tell also based on the huge amount of omnibus stuff that's being produced around this time. You got Tales from the Dark Side of the movie, obviously the Tales from the Crypt TV show, which Hooper directed for, and all of the, your usual suspects of horror, Mick Garris and all, everybody worked for that show, and Walter Hill. And but then of course that extends to Perversions of Science later, which he works for, and the short films that he makes for the Maze. I think that there is an inherent respect between the two of these guys for the kind of early horror omnibus stuff. I mean, going as far back as like Dead of Night from 1945, which had that great cavalcade of English film directors trying their hands at horror, and some of them were better than others. And then of course that becomes the Amicus anthologies in the early 70s, where Freddie Francis and Ward Baker are making these, again, it's all out of the kind of early horror comics idea of, each segment is, a couple of panels of a nightmare thing. It's just, they have this great feeling of the kind of thing that you're reading under the covers at night with a flashlight, like that's the kind of the fun of it. I mean, Romero did one with Creepshow. It was sort of at that point a rite of passage to take part in these things. And they weren't, what I kind of love about that whole exercise is you would think that every part of it would sort of look a little, less, what's the word? A little of ill repute, we'll say, that, you're making short films based on, these kind of lurid concepts. But the beauty of being a horror director, and by that point, we could say that Tobe Hooper was very thoroughly that. I mean, there was a period where perhaps he was going to push himself to kind of get outside of the genre. It never really happened. He couldn't sell himself that way, which I will always lament. Having said that, he had a completely no-nonsense attitude about what he was doing. He wanted to make the best art possible, but he was being hired to make horror, and so he made the best horror possible and the most fun and exciting. And that one is just so great because there's all these great, kind of comic horror ideas right out of the Creep Show stuff, right out of the EC comics, where they got the zombies in the backyard and all. It's so perfect. And he kind of takes like a Jonathan Demme approach to casting as well. You've got all these great character actors and stuff in the bit parts. And I mean, just the idea it's Mark Hamill and Twiggy are married is also like, already you're in like, fantasy land of just the most absurd, dovetailing of horror history. But it's also so great because it means that, Hooper is on the one hand, obviously playing with, Luke Skywalker, right? And he's the down home, the sort of aw shucks, 50s hero from these things. And so he's turning that on its head by making him this violent Christian psychopath who has to, try to stab his wife and he's seeing demons in the backyard and he's possessed. It's a little Jack Torrance-y. And then you got Twiggy, who, is known for a million things, but to a certain stripe of film fans, she's known for being in Ken Russell's The Boyfriend. And of course, Tobe Hooper and Ken Russell had a million things in common, stylistically speaking. And so that was kind of how I, maybe I'm wrong about that. I'm obviously, I do a fair amount of psychoanalysis on behalf of these people because I've spent so much time thinking about them. And you just kind of be like, well, he's got to be paying tribute to The Boyfriend there, right? What else would it be? Why else would you cast Twiggy as Mark Hamill's wife? That doesn't make any sense at all, no matter how you look at it. But that one's great. I mean, it's, the lighting is a little more indebted to the kind of stuff that Carpenter was doing at that point. I mean, you look at like the Village of the Damned remake and or even Memoirs of an Invisible Man, they're a little more pared back. It's not quite, like even Christine, which is like, that movie's perfect to me. There's like a kind of a blue collar aspect to it. And so the lights are always on because you're in suburban houses and stuff, but the framing is so serious that it never really matters that the lighting isn't quite as presentational as it could be. Obviously something like Escape from New York has deeper shadows and, a little more fun with that kind of German expressionist style of lighting and framing. But by the 90s, he had kind of pushed that stuff to the side. I mean, Prince of Darkness, a gorgeous film, the lights are, they might as well be John Landis, the way that they got the lighting setups and stuff like that. It's not really the most moody thing he ever did because the ideas were what interested him. It's always the ideas and how solid and symmetrical and perfect is that image and that great, traveling camera that he loved so much. And so Hooper, I think, is kind of picking up what Carpenter brought to the project because it was very obviously his baby, right? He plays the horror host and he films the other two segments and, he's doing that great black humor thing that he so loved and leaned into. And it's just so much fun. How do you not love guys like that just kind of blowing off steam while also making fun and satisfying little horror films? And Carpenter, of course, doing a great job as that, Crypt Keeper figure and loving all the terrible jokes and stuff. It's a riot. I think it's great.
For sure. And getting into the thematics of it a little bit, I think it's really interesting the way, Twiggy is cast as this covered up, kind of frigid religious wife. And you've got the guy who plays Luke Skywalker, right? The quintessential aw shucks hometown guy who gets to go on an adventure as a guy who's about to make it to the big leagues, the major leagues in baseball, and then doesn't get to go on the adventure.
Yep.
Right? Like Skywalker, he loses a very important organ.
That's right. That's right. I didn't even
and then becomes trapped in the suburbs. Right. The shot of that movie for me, or the short for me, is Mark Hamill trying to assemble the baby crib, and it becomes like the bars of a cell.
Yes.
And then he looks out the window in his suburban home of the fences, which create more
prison bars. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really is, to me, one of the quintessential moments of Tobe Hooper's presentation of men, and specifically the obsolescence of that 50s tight-jawed, stoic.
It's
Breadwinner,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And the fact too that he's a baseball player is also
Yeah.
so perfect. He represents everything about America that a guy like Tobe Hooper would have loathed, right? Where he doesn't really take his responsibility as a father seriously because he didn't think he'd be home all that often because he thought he'd be off in the big leagues or whatever. Even though he's got this tightly wound conservative, core of beliefs that he obviously touches on again and again, it clearly doesn't mean all that much to him because when the hauntings all start, he gets so sucked into that because he doesn't have baseball anymore, and that's the fun of it, is that Hooper laces the story with so many great little open-ended questions and stuff, where on the one hand you can just think to yourself, well, it's just like a 20-minute horror short, of course it's just fun and silly, but also there really aren't any accidents in the Tobe Hooper filmography. Everything is there for a reason, and like you're saying, the prison bars in the suburban house could not be any more perfect. I mean, it's like Poltergeist in miniature, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the little ways that he finds to work in his color scheme. There's the shiny ribbon on the gift that that she's got to tell him that they're having a baby for the first time, and it's wonderful. I Roger Corman and Charlie Napier and John Agar as your supporting cast is just such a perfect, and that was the height of that stuff, because obviously around this time he's got the Todd in Spontaneous Combustion, and James Karen in Everything, and of course his Amazing Stories episode. That's one crazy cameo after another. That's for a minute he was like the Jonathan Demme of horror, with all the great expressive color and the the kind of rep company that he was bringing with him, Lorraine Newman and everything, and people being cast against type for fun, which would have been cool for audiences and stuff. There's a thing I actually saw that reminded me of this a little bit, that kind of idea of the shibboleth between horror fans, where Dana Gould in this movie Joyride that just came out, which is about him and Bobcat Goldthwait doing comedy shows, I think in the South and the Midwest. Dana Gould starts doing a bit about Klansmen, and they're talking about how they were dressing up like ghosts, and one of them says, well, if we're dressing up like ghosts, can we dress up like Dracula? And Bobcat Goldthwait says to him, so these Klan guys were like your fans then? And he goes, yeah, they are all familiar with Forrest Ackerman. I love that idea so perfectly. Just that you enter into this world and everybody, right? Everybody's a familiar face. It's like a high school reunion or something, but it's people you've never met. It's just people intimately because they're in every movie you've ever seen.
Yeah, there's every Hooper film, and not just Hooper, but a lot of the, especially Master of the Park, is such a treat for cinephiles to see. Obviously, I think of Salem's Lot.
Yes.
As such an amazing. I'll keep in the theme of sort of obsolescent men, because the cuckoldry.
Oh yeah.
Salem's Lot. You're talking about at least 3 different fellas getting cuckolded, and then the ultimate cuckold, right? Elisha Cook Jr. From Kubrick's The Killing.
That's right, with Marie Windsor, who of course is the one who makes a fool out of him.
Yeah. Let's talk about Salem's Lot for a minute, because that came at a really pivotal moment in Hooper's early career, right? He's moving from Chainsaw and Eaten Alive to this kind of new genre, right, of TV movie of the week, miniseries, right, 2 hour-and-a-half long episodes, large cast of characters, adapting the Stephen King novel.
I was going to say the Stephen King made-for-TV movie, that's the start of it as its own genre, that it could be a phenomena, and that doesn't go away. I mean, we're still doing it now, Chapel Wait just wrapped up, and that's exactly in that same vein.
Yeah. And Salem's Lot does not get enough kind of coverage in thinking about Hooper's career. Tony Williams writes an essay about it in our book that compares it to Peyton Place.
Sure.
Stuff like Hitchcock's
Shadow of a Doubt.
Shadow of a Doubt. And certainly The Old Dark House, right? I mean, he proved with Texas Chainsaw Massacre that he could do horror without showing gore.
Yep.
Right? And Salem's Lot, I don't know too many TV films, especially during that era and at that level of censorship control, that are as visceral and frightening.
That's I was just reading my friend David Cairns was writing about seeing Salem's Lot for the first time since he was a kid, and coming across the, of course, the scene with the kid at the window, right, scratching to be let into the window. And he was so curious about that because it was such a specific and strange idea where, first of all, he's in his pajamas, which he wasn't in the last time we saw him. So he went back to the source material, and that scene is not in the book, which is like an incredible innovation on the part of everyone involved in that movie. Is how do we make this the most frightening thing possible? And so they dream up this amazing scenario where, there's the kid at the window in his pajamas looking so sort of like, on the one hand, yeah, exactly, looking innocent because he's in his pajamas, but also looking menacing and terrifying because he's floating and his eyes glow now. And he's scratching at the window like an animal. Like everything about it is it absolutely messes with you. And he was saying that the following day on the playground, every kid was talking about that scene, the kid at the window. Never mind anything else. It was the kid at the window that freaked out everybody on the playground. And of course it did, because that movie is like a perfect delivery system for scares, right? Where on the one hand, like you're saying, you've got the Peyton Place romantic, televisual drama thing, whatever, and then again, we're talking about the golden age of televised soap opera. And there's no way that Hooper would have been, immune to seeing that stuff. That was just everywhere. It was in the groundwater. People were watching General Hospital or whatever, Dallas or any of those things. And so he takes the language of that and plays it fairly straight, and then interrupts it with the most horrifying, visceral, like you're saying, imagery of all time. And again, it's not gore. It's the worst thing you can think of popping into frame at the most inopportune moments, where you've got people who are feeling extra vulnerable because they're in jail or they're in hospital beds or they're sitting down to dinner with their families. And in walks this, interrupting element that is so bone chilling that you cannot then resituate yourself and like flee it or fight it like effectively. That's the maybe for me the moment in all of Salem's Lot that sort of like gets at the heart of that project is the dinner sequence where the priest comes in to try to save the family from being killed, and he can't do it, and James Mason is there just narrating his inner crisis. Oh God, it's so good. Back shaman, God. I mean, James Mason, that performance is very good.
Oh yeah, fantastic. I have to try to imagine what it must have been like to see it at that time. We can't even inhabit the consciousness of someone who is watching primetime television in 1979 with like 3 or 4 channels, maybe. Appointment viewing. You get up to move, you miss something. You might be watching with the lights on in your family room, and then suddenly there's Reggie Nalder like jumping, or the parents, the priest. The moment that really got me, first time I saw it as a kid, which I think would have been on like TNT or something. It might have even been on Monster Vision. I don't know. But I remember as a kid, and probably the only memory I have of that movie from my first viewing was Jeffrey Lewis sitting in the dark room chair going, "Look at me."
Absolutely terrifying.
I have nightmares, and that's in there.
Yeah, it's because again, you speak to the perennial travesty of somebody who is this good at being able to get past the censors on primetime television. We talk a little about that this was a burgeoning form at the time. Obviously, Dan Curtis was hard at work making the likes of, Trilogy of Terror and Dracula, and you've got like what is it, Burnt Offerings with Oliver Reed and Karen Black, and then there's another great one. Actually, this is one of my dad's favorites, where it's Bing Crosby plays a doctor who has been sort of like forcibly euthanizing his patients and burying them in his garden. I think it's called it's like In His Garden or something like that. I gotta look this up right now. But it was like 1970 something or other, and it was because it wasn't really like a horror movie. Like people don't talk about it in that way, but it was like Dr. Cook's Garden. That's what it's called.
And it's
71. Yeah, Bing Crosby, directed by Ted Post.
Wow.
Yeah.
I hope he has a little croon in there, like, you know, take the jab, you know.
To my knowledge, I don't think he sings it, but I don't remember. But
Missing.
that was, yeah, it was Ira Levin who wrote Rosemary's Baby. It was his writing that went in there, and but then there was also like David McCallum was in an adaptation of The Screaming Skull in '73. So it's like, you know, there was precedent for this kind of a thing, and yet it was still unusual for it to be extremely scary. Like there's that great one. It was a triptych, kind of like Body Bags, where I forget what it's, Tales from the Dark Side, or it's not Tales from the Dark Side, but it's something in that vein where one of the ones is like a young Ted Danson or Bruce Greenwood or something. He like drives a car into the past, but the one that scared people is the one about the mother whose son comes back to life in their like very nice ultra modern apartment, and he's like kind of tormenting her around the house. That was around the same time as Salem's Lot. I think it predated it by a couple of years, but it was still perhaps not as common to see things that seemed like engineered perfectly in that way, where there would be a scary moment on whatever your TV movie was, but you got to fill an hour and a half of programming time to get that 2-hour primetime slot there. They were running them at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., that kind of thing. So you needed to fill up that, you know, that whole space. And Tobe Hooper seems like the first guy who approached it and said, okay, well, how can we make this the scariest thing that anyone's ever seen? And like
the atmosphere, the interiors of the Marston house, which recall, of course, the Sawyer's home in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And you know, I'm struck watching it by the masterful pacing. And here's a guy who can make a 74-minute movie like Chainsaw and a 186-minute movie like Salem's Lot, and still have the economy of pacing, the nuance of character development. That keeps you in your seat, engaged the whole time. And again, that cast, I mean, he got such a great performance out of David Soul.
Oh yeah.
You know, I can't even remember if he's Starsky or if he's Hutch.
Yeah.
But for a beautiful leading man in training, to have a moment like he does in the climax of Salem's Lot, where he's about to stake our vampire and loses it, like just starts to shake, drops the stakes, just complete emasculation in that moment. This blonde Adonis.
Yeah.
David Soul,
looking tanned and happy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and this is why you're tuning in, right? Because David Soul is the star of the flick. You're not tuning in for Fred Willard.
Nope.
We might now.
Like, yeah. Where did Fred Willard come from? Was he like a Firesign Theater guy? Like, what was his, like? I remember he was part of some comedy organization, but I don't remember what it was. But even still, I mean, I think he was on Newhart a couple of times and stuff. But yeah. He was not. Yeah, he was not even really known at that point as the comedy figure that he was. Like that starts with Spinal Tap, which was still 5 years away.
Right.
But yeah, no, everybody else in that movie would have been exactly the kind of character background stuff that people would have been used to seeing. But Hooper is obviously employing them in a much more knowing fashion than your average TV director, right? If you're Dan Curtis, you're hiring Karen Black because she's great. You're hiring everybody else because they're around, you know, like. And with this one, every casting choice seems purposeful, with the exception of David Soul, who does seem kind of like, all right, well, here's your lead. You know, you can do the rest all you want. So,
right,
him and Bonnie Bedelia and what Lance Kerwin as the kid, and then everybody else seems a little more, you know, purposefully chosen. Where you've got obviously, like we talked about, Jeffrey Lewis,
Lou Ayres,
George Shunza, and Kenneth McMillan. Kenneth McMillan is the sheriff. Oh God, he's so good. Another perfect coward.
Yeah, right. And it's that kind of, I mean, we talked in the live stream a little bit about how Hooper's influences were really everyone, because he was such a cinephile. You couldn't really peg him to specific or single influences. He was such a fan of classical cinema, Hammer films.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know,
movies.
Yeah,
everything.
like the kind of person where you could just sense this voraciousness of all kinds, and basically cinema all in sundry, which is what we associate with people like Godard and Rivette or Truffaut, right, where they were seeing everything, and then maybe you'd get like a joke here or there about horror stuff, but because again, Hooper chose horror movies, and because like Wells, he was sort of somebody that it was easy to look at as problematic because the films, whatever, they ran over budget, or they were reported on wrong or something. They were headaches for studios, and so at that point it was not smart for them to traffic in that stuff. And it was the same reason that Wells stopped. He was, as long as he was still dating Rita Hayworth and still making money and still handsome, they could they could use him. But then all that stuff went away, and his movies were going over budget, and of course he was spending it all on everything because he was born rich, and he wanted the nice wine and the nice lobsters and everything when he was not directing, and all that money went there. And it's incredibly easy, I think, to start forgetting why we go to the movies when you want to be able to tell people that you're not too fanciful about it or something. The people, and this is a very odd thing that I picked up on, the amount of people who really do take to heart all of the box office returns, reporting, and all that stuff as if it matters now. That there are people who really do want you to know that they're upset that Michael Cimino spent all that money on Heaven's Gate, or that Wells spent all that money on Mr. Arcadin or whatever. And it's like, who is this for at this point? Like, there's some brand of auteurism where you're really, really into the accountants who are working at studios now above the artists who are making the movies we're talking about. It's such an absurd state of affairs. I'll never get over that is such an important thing in film culture. People who are really looking out for, studio bosses who, oh God, yeah.
Yeah, no sympathy.
No, none.
All right, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you.
Okay.
And here's the segue. Here's a film, lesser known, of Hooper that really shows in its stylistics the influence of Hitchcock, the influence of German Expressionism. The casting is kind of amazing, in particular with some folks who become much more well-known later. It is one of the only Hooper films that is not yet available on a legally released DVD or Blu-ray. That's right, of course, I'm talking about another Showtime production, 1999's The Apartment Complex.
Right.
Starring my favorite Low, Chad.
You were the second person to make that joke in the last 24 hours to me. Yeah.
Somebody else has expressed they prefer Chad. I'm no joke. I find Rob smarmy.
No argument here.
Chad has more pathos to him,
Chad's a little more of an everyman.
Yeah, well, and I'll always have a soft spot. This is not related to Hooper, but I'm a big fan of the film Highway to Hell.
That's exactly that's exactly the argument. That's a good movie, Highway to Hell. I think I mentioned that because Texas Chainsaw 3 and Highway to Hell have a lot in common. They're both Southern California road trip horror movies. And
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But only one cast Gilbert Gottfried as Hitler.
And Ben Stiller as Genghis Khan, I believe.
Right. So go see Highway to Hell, people. I think Kino.
Yeah, you gotta see Highway to Hell. That was I saw that at like 2 a.m. on like a pay channel years and years ago.
Yeah. I had a VHS dub of it for many years until this recent Blu-ray came out. But let's talk about The Apartment Complex for a little bit, because this is one film that I would wager to bet that many in our audience haven't seen yet, and should seek out and should put pressure on boutique Blu-ray labels to release, and perhaps invite us on to give
commentary.
Chad Lowe, you've got Patrick Warburton, pre-Seinfeld. You got Amanda Plummer, John Polito, R. Lee Ermey, Tyra Banks, and R. Lee Ermey in the same scene.
The fans were screaming for it, and they got it.
So the premise of the film, right, is Chad Lowe is a psychology grad student who takes a job as the super at a very bizarre apartment complex that is owned, I guess, by a dead ringer for Dr. Caligari.
That's right.
I believe he's actually called Dr.
I
Caligari.
believe he is. Yes,
Yeah.
that's not John Polito. It's Charles Martin Smith, right?
Right. No, it is John Polito that plays Dr.
It is John Polito. Okay, all right.
Thank you, imdb.com. We'll plug this. And the film immediately begins kind of swishing around a murder mystery with some domestic dramas, some comedic mishaps. You've got some rear window type voyeurism. You've got some the Tenant-like moments of Chad Lowe kind of digging through his space and is it real? Is it not real? There's at one point some kind of python that eats people.
Forgot about that. Yeah,
there's a bloated dead body in the pool, and it's a comedy. That works a reasonable amount of time. Nobody's going to argue this is top 5 Hooper, but it's very well worth seeing and worth thinking about in the context of his career.
I remember seeing a featurette from around the time that it was debuting. I mean, obviously every major network, when they're, financing I'm saying major network, all the major pay channels, when they finance, expensive original movies and TV series, there is extensive coverage done on the set, right? Because you got to do a lot of promo for it and all that stuff. So if you've just, you bought your Showtime subscription because you might see the Red Shoe Diaries or something like that, they're trying to get you to tune in to watch the other things too, because they need the numbers to go up for everything. But anyway, the thing that struck me as most interesting is that the 2 writers of that show, apparently, their version of events is they wrote the thing, they sold it to Showtime, and then they were asked who they wanted to direct it, and they said Tobe Hooper. And I always found that so kind of cool because, you've got people here who know his reputation, even if they are, perhaps unaware that, he hasn't been of the same profile that he started out at, that run from Texas Chainsaw to Poltergeist, where he was, a big name for a minute, and that sort of fell by the wayside. But it's also so awesome because they wrote a movie, like you're saying, that's essentially a dark comedy. It's not a horror movie. There are horrific elements and all that stuff. But again, it's the 90s. Dark comedy like that was everywhere. I mean, you look at Paul Schrader's Witch Hunt, or Martin Campbell's Cast the Dark Spell, or even like Hocus Pocus, right, which was written by Mick Garris. There was this push towards the mainstreamizing horror sensibilities by throwing it into the shape of other stuff. I mean, Scream is well known today because it was also a comedy about movies, right?
Yeah.
And so that cross-pollination, I think, kind of ruled the day a little bit there. And so it really probably didn't seem all that contradictory to hire Tobe Hooper for this. And I would kill to know if those writers had seen any of his 90s TV stuff, which does point the way towards this. I mean, specifically, the psychiatry stuff in Nowhere Man is framed very, very similarly to so much of the more expressionistic stuff that happens in the apartment complex. Obviously, the idea of, like we were saying, calling the landlord Caligari opens you up to Tobe Hooper getting to do what he liked to do, which also Scorsese is a fan of, which is stealing compositions from Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, right? Shutter Island was the same thing. There's so much Caligari all over that movie. But it doesn't interfere with the watching of the thing. It's for people who know that movie is a response to World War I, and so about generational trauma, infecting everything that is being touched by that point. And of course, the whole point of this movie is somebody being thrust into this kind of conspiratorial atmosphere, and really all they're trying to do is make a buck, right? They're just trying to live, and instead they're being set up as the patsy for this bizarro experiment that's going on, which of course he should know because he himself is an experimental scientist. But that's the beauty of it, is that you think you've got everything figured out, and he does this again in Toolbox Murders with starry-eyed people who come to LA to make it work, and of course they wind up getting their asses handed to them by this.
Mention that one. Yeah, along with Toolbox Murders and Gin, this is Hooper's apartment triptych.
Exactly.
Now, Carl Schaefer got the writing credit, and he had created and executive produced Erie, Indiana.
Right, which of course Joe Dante worked on.
Joe Dante, and like you say, right, that pushing of the horror genre into different boxes to make a more palatable audiences. Erie, Indiana, right, is a kids or family comedy show, and well worth watching to those who might not be familiar with it.
Absolutely. But that's, I mean, you know, that there was a lot of cross-pollination there between Joe Dante working on that show and then, of course, making Matinee because they have the same star. And then, you know, again, like we were talking about with, you know, Tales from the Crypt. Tales from the Crypt was on the gorier end of things because it's HBO and they would have demanded that stuff, right? They wanted nudity and they wanted lots of blood. But on the other side of that, at the same time, you've got Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon, which doesn't have any of that stuff. But I think for a certain audience, I remember a couple of those episodes when I was a kid scaring the hell out of me, you know? That was a gamble when you were, you know, 5 or 6 years old and that shit was on television. You're like, do I want to watch this? Do I want nightmares tonight? But there was that, you know, sort of like trying to prove that you're, you know, adult enough to watch the fucking scary thing. But that's, you know, and again, so that's, I think that they're having fun with the idea of making a nominally normal movie that keeps getting, like Salem's Lot, interrupted by horrific business. But also, you know, just the idea that you're going to cast, you know, at that point, like you were saying, Seinfeld's Patrick Warburton and, you know, Miguel Sandoval and Arlie Ermy and, you know, Charles Martin Smith. I mean, Rachel True is in that movie, who was just in The Craft, another mainstreamized horror film. You know, it's so obvious that everybody involved with it is having fun with this as an artifact. They all know what they're doing there. Amanda Plummer giving a crazy performance because she knows that that's what it calls for. So there's this turning outward of the innards of that film for all to see pretty much every step of the way. And again, like we were saying, casting Chad Lowe as your lead is also a sort of a clue, right? Because that's a comic actor. He is your I mean, he's like, you know, weird Gen X Jimmy Stewart, right? He's thrust in the middle of a mystery and he has to kind of work his way out of the side of that. But,
that's a nice corollary. He does bewildered and bemused quite well in this film. And you know, coming 3 years after the smash success of Scream, which I think is an interesting there's an interesting comparison there, because this is a film like Scream that is very much a metatext, to bore people with that term. But it's a movie about movies, but outside of the obvious, right, category in Hitchcock, you really do need to know your stuff to appreciate that. Scream, which is a great film, this is not a criticism, you don't have to know shit about horror movies to appreciate Scream, because it tells you.
Exactly.
The Apartment Complex doesn't. It leaves the references for your fun, and really that's the case with Hooper's whole career, Salem's Lot, as we were just discussing.
It's because all that stuff is nailed in there a little better, right? It's not, you know, if you're watching Scream, you kind of reach for a board and the whole thing comes off, and on the other side is the clue that you were looking for, which is, again, not a criticism. That movie is hugely successful for that reason, right? It makes everybody, for the hour and a half that they're watching Scream, a horror expert, and that is a fun impulse. Yeah. I would complain perhaps later that by the time we get to Cabin in the Woods, that has become a school unto itself. The idea of the idea that a movie has to tell you all of its influences, because otherwise what would you be looking at? You'd be looking at empty images and all, you know, so they have to do all that homework for you. And that leads into elevated horror, which has nothing to offer anyone for any reason at all. But that was, you know, and not to place the blame on Scream, but that's a tough impulse to fight, I think, in culture. And it's why we see so much of it, even in whatever our superhero movies and everything is. I get this reference. There's even a fucking joke about it in the Avengers, right? I get this joke, and so this joke is funny, right? It's like, well, no, you get it, but that doesn't mean. But again, that's really tough. And Tobe was not the kind of person to spoon feed his audience, not in that way, because to him that wasn't the point of making the movie. You make the movie to make the best movie possible. You fill it with other things because that pleases you, right? But you don't go to. He was only too aware of the fact that, you know, for instance, to pick something that we, you know, can adduce that he was a fan of, the Roger Corman Poe stuff. He didn't hire Vincent Price because he thought that there would be fans of other Vincent Price movies going specifically to see him give this performance, right? You weren't going to see House of Usher because you were a huge fan of His Kind of Woman, right? You went because it was Vincent Price. It was, you know, it was a big horror film. It was lurid. It was beautiful. It was splashy. And Corman did not take for granted that you were going there for any other reason than to be wowed by everything, right? And Hooper was very much the same way, because he didn't even get big name stars, right? So what's the point of hiring all those people, you know, if they're not actually going to be able to do the job? So that's why you get James Karen or Lorraine Newman and, and to Timothy Bottoms, I think, in Invaders from Mars, or all of that amazing cast in Life Force, right? Frank Finley and Patrick Stewart and Steve Railsback. They were not box office draws at that point. They were just the best guys for the job. They were going to give it their all. They were going to give the Shakespearean Sam Shepard-y gravitas to everything that they touched, and that was going to help sell the film. It was not horse before the cart, which I think is what so much of filmmaking has become now. I mean, everything that you read about, it's a deal memo. It's not a movie, right? It's like just the idea of Timothée Chalamet as the lead in Dune is like, it's just producer Mad Libs. It's all right, who's around and who's handsome? Great, we'll get him in there. Doesn't matter. There's no sense of whether he's actually fit to play the part, because that calculus no longer enters into the idea of making movies.
I think this has taken on a much wider scope, and I'm glad for it. I'm gonna give us a challenge now. I hadn't planned on doing this, but I feel like we've got a little momentum here, and I want to see what we can do with it.
Okay.
One of my personal favorite essays in our book is by Mike Thorne.
Love Mike.
And he takes the challenge of writing about eaten alive and crocodile. So let's talk about crocodile for a minute. Made in 2000, straight to video. This was not directly after the apartment complex. I think he did an episode of television on the Others. That's right. The episode called Souls on Board, which I have to admit, that was one that I was not able to view in the research. Crocodile, generally dismissed out of hand. And this was during a spate of films written by Jay Sanderson and Adam Girash, who also wrote Toolbox Murders for Hooper.
Mortuary too, right? Mortuary too, I believe, right?
Mortuary, which I also would like to talk about. Although Chris Woofter, my co-editor, he's the mortuary expert, but I really love that movie.
Yeah.
Underrated comedy in Hooper's filmography. But I'm moving away from Crocodile, the challenge that I set for ourselves. What do we make of this film? It's pretty low budget. There's some CGI that is of its time.
Certainly.
Would not have been out of place in, say, a Jim Wynorski made for Sci-Fi Channel show, which, no shade.
I was gonna say,
love Jim Wynorski. That'll be another Zoom call. But I'm just making reference to the level of budget that we're talking about here.
But also, I mean, that's not a bad point in comparison. Also, because with Jim, for instance, you are, there's calibration done, right? You see a Jim Wynorski movie, whether it's under a pseudonym or not, you see the box art, you see the TV spots for it, you see whatever, you know what you're getting, right? You know exactly what it is. And this goes all the way back to chopping, right?
I call him Mr. Wynorski out of respect, or Mr. Blueberry, depending on what pseudonym he's using. But anyway, continue.
That's the idea, right? Is that especially, and this was the start of the stigma of the made for sci-fi movie, right? This was a brand new form. Sci-Fi Channel at that point was still known for fairly comprehensive and interesting science fiction, right? Were Farscape, and they bought Mystery Science Theater, and they
3 seasons of Mystery Science Theater. You got First Wave, you got Invisible Man, Dead Zone, all that stuff coming out. But anyway, there was
a great program they used to do where they would run sci-fi short films made for a whole series of budget and stuff like that. It was, the whole point was you were gonna see something interesting and something made with passion. That was true for a couple of years into the birth of the Sci-Fi Channel, right? Then this wave starts, and this is kind of the beginning of the end. And people have tried to resurrect it, right? Like Z Nation is a film that's sort of tried to get this show that's tried to get the Sci-Fi Channel a little of its groove back. But these series of movies, and it included Spiders and Octopus, all produced by Boaz Davidson, who was a Canon satellite, much like Hooper himself, which is probably what got him the job.
Oh, and side note, Carl Schaefer is a producer on Z Nation.
There you go.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And yeah, and he directs with John Hyams,
Yeah.
the great Black Summer, one of the great television shows of our era right now. And but that's so this was the start of the idea of being able to make really cheap horror movies and draw people in, right? All of these films got sequels, each worse than the next. But it was not a complete loss at that point. It really wasn't the case that you would turn these movies on and only get something terrible. It really took him a couple of years to get to the likes of like Webs with Richard Grieco, right? And at that point, it was over. We all
Liked that.
What's that?
I kind of liked them.
Did you really? Okay. Well,
no, not really.
No. But anyway, so getting Tobe Hooper was to me almost like, I mean, on the one hand, it was obviously producer, arithmetic, as we need to get a name because we need these things to sell, blah, blah, blah. They didn't even really advertise it as a Tobe Hooper film, though. That was kind of the thing that was interesting, was when they were first airing these movies, they advertised them as a package deal. Like, look, we got these new original monster movies. And you saw the great shot from Crocodile of the first attack with the mouth coming on the dock. And then you saw from Octopus the thing where he's climbing on the cruise ship and all that stuff. So it wasn't at that point an auteurist prospect. And this, of course, is Bose Davidson being the producer that he is. And of course, the Sci-Fi Channel realizing they got all this money they got to make back. So they're just like, here, it's a bunch of monster movies. Look at these. These are great. And so I remember seeing Crocodile when it first aired, because again, there was no audience more attuned to new cheap horror than me at that point. I loved that shit so much. Them was one of the first films to give me nightmares. I was all in on big creatures. And I saw it and I was a little disappointed, I guess, but only in hindsight. I was 10 or 11 or something when that came out, and I watched it on VHS because I think I missed the original air date, and I was fairly captivated by it. Later, I went back and I was like, oh, this doesn't really seem up to his. And then 10 years after that, I went back again. I was like, oh, actually, this is really well made for what it is. The way that he frames the boat is like, again, right out of like Apocalypse Now or something. He's got these gorgeous vistas of the river with the matte paintings and all this. I was like, God damn, he really did his homework on this one, which again speaks to the Hooper thing, is he never phoned in anything. He never threw away anything in his life. He was going to show up for work and do the thing no matter what it was. And you compare that to Spiders or Octopus or any of the other, sci-fi originals that spring up in the wake of, the Shark Attack movies are a great example of nobody gave a shit. And that was just not the case with Crocodile. It's like Crocodile, it's tough because he very accurately captures that kind of, Gen X frat boy thing, which is to his credit that he got it so believably, on film, but also it's just not fun to hang out with those guys in the way that it is, Sally and her friends in Texas Chainsaw. It was a lesson I think that he probably should have learned at that point, because how does Texas Chainsaw 2 open, right? You got the two worst fucking jock assholes in the world, and he kills them horribly right away. And then the movie can get on to being about other people that you actually care about.
Right. This will be the movie if those jocks met up with their friends and then you went on a weekend with them.
Exactly.
And you know what it reminds me of? And this is a stretch in some ways, but I would recommend this as a double feature for people who wanted to check out Crocodile, is the segment The Raft in Creepshow 2.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Michael Gornick, right, who is Romero's director of photography, he's the one who directs that, and so he would have absolutely been attuned to that sort of horror as communal experience thing that was Romero's, bread and butter.
Yeah, the superficial connection is the setting is very similar. It's these asshole teenagers out on the water being assholes. The difference is the raft. You've got this weird, moldy, gooey
thing, yeah,
Jello stuff, and in Crocodile you have a crocodile. But the way the asshole teenagers are handled, the way the technique of the kills, the way Hooper works around the limitations of his practical and CGI effects with the crocodile, just really it gives me a sense of the mood, the atmosphere of the raft, the sort of daylight horror. broad daylight horror. There's not.
Absolutely, yeah. There's only 2-3 segments in Crocodile that take place at night. One of them is the raid on the cabin. One of them is the egg smashing that sets off the rampage in the first place, and one of them is the kid getting chomped on the dock for the first time. But you're right, for the most part, that movie is set during the day, and there really isn't any kind of loss of atmosphere for that reason. I think that when you're dealing with a big special effect or whatever, you got to kind of work with how you have to light it and all that stuff, and it works better as a puppet at night, etc. Yeah, I mean, really the only thing that lets that movie down is the CGI in a handful of the sequences where he's spitting the guy back out in the air and all that nonsense. But
Yeah.
that I think I don't know if you picked up on this, but there is, especially in horror filmmaking, such a tendency towards allowing like fucking Wile E. Coyote shit into so much of otherwise dead serious horror movies. And I would kill to know if it's simply that every one of these guys saw the same 6 cartoons as a kid because there really wasn't that much else on television, or like what the thing is that nobody can resist that style joke. I don't know why it is, but it always shows up in horror movies. No matter how serious the rest of it is, it's very funny to me.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I mean, for Hooper, those kinds of gags go all the way back to the Heisters, right? I mean,
For sure.
You got that kind of the Looney Tunes meets Hammer movie mashup. Some Rube Goldberg meets Wile E. Coyote explosives.
Absolutely. But that's, yeah, no, I like Crocodile a lot more than I used to. And I think perhaps, the reason that I don't write about it extensively in my book is because to me it was Gen X Texas Chainsaw, right? It was Texas Chainsaw, and we'll say Eaten Alive as well, even though, again, the only thing that really connects them is the sort of milieu of people you don't really like, that you don't want to spend much time with. And I think in general, I think he directs it very nicely. I think the camera placement and the choreography and stuff is excellent and up to his standards. It's simply that a couple of other things make it kind of uninteresting, but that's again, that's just sort of what happens when Boaz Davidson calls you and says, do you want to work for the Sci-Fi Channel? And interestingly enough, he's rebounded quite well, Boaz Davidson. He had no shortage of money or anything at this point because he has got a resume as long as your nightshirt. But he's producing like The Hitman's Wife or Bodyguard or whatever that is. He's doing.
Wait a second. Who wears a nightshirt?
Nobody. It's from the Assassination of Jesse James by the Karen Robert.
Oh, right. Hey, all right. Yeah,
Yeah.
Well played.
Thank you very much. This is the problem with being a fucking film fanatic. Everything out of your mouth is a reference. But I kind of loved that spirit of things, that he went from working for Golan and Globus to kind of being a free agent in the 90s, and now he's back on top again, and there's nothing that he won't make money off of now. Like I respect that enormously in the film business for sure.
Yeah, God bless him. All right, I'm going to shift gears one more time.
Sure.
Because one thing that we didn't get to talk about much in our book, a couple paragraphs here and there, was this Midnight Movie, which Tobe Hooper wrote with Alan Goldshire. Alan Goldshire also co-wrote Robert Englund's autobiography, which Tobe Hooper did the foreword to. Don't know if that's how they got hooked up, but obviously that's a possibility. Midnight Movie is really interesting to me, and it did not get as much coverage as, say, Wes Craven's, what was the name of that? The Fountain Project.
Right.
Or David Cronenberg's Consumed. And both of which are interesting in their own right. Consumed especially is very Cronenbergian, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
The Midnight Movie is really interesting because it is, we've been talking a lot about Hooper as a sort of metatextual filmmaker, and here he is as a metatextual writer, because you've got this book that is an internet age epistolary, right? Most of the narrative is blog posts, emails, tweets. It's about a filmmaker named Tobe Hooper, who is going to Texas where they're going to screen a lost film of his called Destiny Express Redux, um, which mysteriously begins to cause a sort of contagion that creates rage zombies, but also gets into people's dreams. And what's really fascinating about this book is that it seems to combine the primary tropes of the other masters of horror. You've got Wes Craven in dream stuff. You've got Romero's zombies. You've got Cronenbergian body horror. You've got
the King in Yellow and cigarette burns as the kind of stuff in the background about the idea of the curse.
Right, Carpenter, and not to mention Carpenter's Howard Hawks worship in the buddy story between Hooper and a Texas film critic,
right.
who kind of become the de facto heroes of the novel. And it's fascinating to me the way and I argue a little bit in the book that this book kind of predicts troll culture.
Yeah.
Which this book is what, 2012? Troll culture was happening, certainly 2011.
Yeah, I thought it was earlier. Yeah.
But there are scenes of these sort of rage zombies on the streets that are not out of place with the march in Charlottesville, the Proud Boys, rioting, or even January the 6th. It's a fascinating read.
I love that stuff from him too, because again, it's in his movies, he was, frequently working with other writers and stuff like that. And so we have to kind of pull our own conclusions out of the body of work. The beauty of it is these themes appear so many times that at a certain point you can say to yourself, this was not accidental, right? If it shows up in 10 films, there's no way that he's doing any of this, And of course you learn that the more that you watch, that nothing in his movies is accidental. Every camera placement is on purpose. Every performance is exactly pitched where he wants it to be, every casting choice, blah, blah, blah. Actually taking the time to write this book further cements the things that he was interested in. And I do think that you're right about that being prescient, because I think that he really did have his finger on the pulse of these things. Like the movie that, it probably owes the most to in his own body of work, other than perhaps we can say Life Force, would be The Damned Thing, because that's set in the South. And it's about, people with this hysteria and people going to seek, help from authorities and priests and stuff. And they're the first ones to try to kill them. Exactly.
And yet another example of the obsolescent male.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Well, God, even, that fella, Sean Patrick Thomas, is that his name? Sean Patrick Flannery. That performance is probably his best work as an actor, because he just the whole time he seems like he's falling apart. It seems like his spine won't work. And it's like, so it's so perfect, because you've got, and this was true of so many public figures throughout that period during the Iraq War, people who really could have done something if only they could have gotten their fucking spine to work, who could have said something, who could have thrown a monkey wrench into the works of the rolling back of civil liberties, or the gutting of Iraq's infrastructure, any of that stuff.
Rest in peace, Colin Powell.
Rest in peace, Colin Powell. Yeah, reluctant warrior.
Not so much Donald Rumsfeld. You can
fuck that guy forever. I mean, fuck them all. Whatever. But that's exactly the thing, is that I think Hooper understood all that stuff perfectly. I think that the only again, because Damned Thing and Dance of the Dead were not very well regarded, and certainly Crocodile was not very well regarded, people stopped asking him questions about this stuff. But he was no less plugged into any of it. It was just that he was not, he wasn't John Landis. He wasn't going, or even Joe Dante for that matter. He wasn't going to make Homecoming, right? He wasn't going to tell you exactly how he thought. He was going to let you do that work, because the important thing was scenery and atmosphere and camera placement. Always, 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 that stuff comes first. And I think in writing home movies, he was attempting to shift the conversation away from that stuff, because by this point, he had been more than aware that the political points that he was trying to make in the last 25 years of his body of work had been more or less ignored by the mainstream press. And so if you can just put it out there for everyone to see that you're thinking these things and you yourself are doing them. They're not your co-writers, they're not your producers, these are your ideas as much as anything. And maybe you can kind of get people to recalibrate what they think about your past work, as well as trying to open people's eyes a little bit to what was going on around them. It made me lament the fact that he never got to make a found footage film, because I think that would have been really fucking cool.
Yeah, it worked wonders for Romero's late career, and I think Hooper would have done some interesting things with it as well. So
Yeah,
Midnight Movie. After you all buy our books, go check out Midnight Movie. Toss some coin Alan Goldshire's way.
absolutely.
Well, all right, so we've been talking about an hour, and now I want to bring us to a close, because I could watch us forever, but the internet will probably cut us off after a while. Here's an exercise that I'd like us to try. All right, I've seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've learned how to pronounce Tobe Hooper. Give me 5 more projects that you would steer me to in order to kind of convey the artistic depth and artistic range of Hooper.
I would, and this is kind of a tough one to pick just one of them, because the 3 counterculture films I think are so valuable in framing so much of what he does later. And that, of course, is The Song Is Love, Down Friday Street, and Eggshells. I think I'd have to go with Eggshells as the choice from that period, because it's the one that really introduces the horrific violence for which he will become known, in the form of the sort of melting of these, kind of post-idealists, communists. But also it's a movie, again, that when you have seen and read and heard all of the American media about the Vietnam War, and then you watch something like Eggshells, the word Vietnam, I don't think, is uttered once in that film, right? But you know exactly what that's about. You know exactly what Eggshells is about at that point, because maybe because it's in the groundwater, right? The way we talk about it, the way we frame it, all that stuff, and you hear that folk music, and you hear the chanting, and you see the demonstrations, and you know exactly that that's what that film is about. It's his Zabriskie point. It's and I think that is a great way to situate yourself in his political worldview, but also get used to the idea that this is a filmmaker who would really take seriously the idea of the camera telling the story first, because he's got, on the one hand, these Stan Brakhage-esque freak out moments, which lets you know that this is somebody who has watched not simply your classics of Hollywood, Orson Welles and Jacques Tourneur. He has watched experimental cinema, and he has taken part in the Texas counterculture, and he has listened to all those bands and gone to all those shows and seen the Liquid Light shows and stuff like that. So I think that to me is a very important one to have right away. I would also do Salem's Lot, to show what it looked like when he had an incredible budget and amazing casts and all the time in the world to do exactly what he wanted to do. And just to see what he does with the Marston House, right? You've seen Texas Chainsaw. Here's what that looks like with $1 million and a CBS suits breathing down your neck. I would do I'm Dangerous Tonight, because it shows you that, however long into the future that we've, last seen him, whether that's Poltergeist or Texas Chainsaw, his political leanings have, if anything, intensified, because this is a movie in which no man is the hero, and the only person that you're rooting for is somebody who is, for a time, under the, the sort of influence of this cursed garment. It also hints at his own sort of proclivities as a fan of classic literature and horror literature. It's based on a Brian Edgar Wallace story, I believe. I'm say this before I feel silly getting it wrong later. Cornel Woolrich, not Edgar Wallace.
Oh, right.
Thinking the other guy who inspires all the creamies. But anyway, it's a very, very contemporary film in its political leanings. You really wouldn't have to change anything if you made this now. It would just look worse.
Played CGI though.
Exactly, right.
Well, shout out to Stan Giese. I'm looking forward to his book about this tonight. Yeah.
I would do I'm tempted to say The Mangler because I love it so much, and because it's a movie that really does need to be, reconfigured. But I think unless, unfortunately, you've had a crash course in 1940s B movies and the entirety of the Tobe Hooper thing, you'll maybe be a little bit lost. So instead, I will say Life Force, because that's another one where that sensibility gets a crazy workout through a couple of different insane producers asking for this and that, but also, proof after Poltergeist, if any was needed, that this was a guy who knew what to do with the studio budget and a huge lighting crew and an incredible, just all that money is right up there on the screen. And then lastly, I would say probably Jin, to be honest, because it pointed the way towards the direction that he would have headed if he had continued to make, modern horror films in the modern film economy. We're talking at that point post Insidious and post Paranormal Activity and post Rob Zombie and Eli Roth and all that, and he was still making things that felt of a piece with his early work. And that's why I have to have I'm Dangerous Tonight in there, because those two movies are like yin and yang. They use a lot of the same techniques, and they are as interested in women sort of being forced to deal with the expectations placed on them culturally by everyone around them, even the people who love them, and especially the people who love them. That's why it feels so manipulative. And I think he still had it. I think he absolutely still had it at that point. And so those are the films that I would say that would probably give you the broadest overview of what kind of a guy he was, beyond what kind of movies and art he liked to make, what kind of a human being he was. And that is as important as knowing what an incredible artist he was.
All right, that's a good 5. I'm cheating a little bit by making you go first, because this means that
now you get it. Yep.
But it works out for the viewers because this way you get 10.
That's right.
So I would do, I'll go back to that counterculture period. The Peter, Paul, and Mary, the song was Love, which, as I mentioned in the live stream, Chris spent the better part of a year tracking down a copy, and it's the centerpiece of our introduction, talking about finding the damn thing. Now it's on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
So go see it. It's Hooper himself called it an assemblage that happens to have Peter, Paul, and Mary in it, and it's this amazing, this amazing penetrative analysis of the sort of swirling complications of the civil rights movement, Vietnam, the music industry's shift from folk to pop rock, and the nature of public activism in the form of Peter, Paul, and Mary themselves. A fantastic
great movie.
And you mentioned in your book the sort of mediated images. Chris Wolfter talks about those a lot in ours as well. It really prefigures a lot of what comes later for Hooper. So that'd be my first one. It's hard to do 5.
I know, right?
I've got like 8 that I want to say, but I held you to it. You managed to hold it down. I'll do it too. I've got to go with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 from his canon period. It was the film that introduced me to Hooper, the first Hooper film that I saw.
Wow.
It is so funny. It is so intense. The performances by Bill Moseley, Jim Sedow are so amazing. Caroline Williams' Stretch is an iconic. I think she transcends the scream queen. She cannot be reduced to that.
Oh yeah. Well,
she's a scream matron.
There's been a lot of talk lately that between friends of mine on Twitter about queer readings of Texas Chainsaw 2 and the trans subtext of Leatherface and all that. It's a movie that is so rich because it is so. I mean, that movie is like a torpedo. It just goes right, and so it doesn't seem as though there's much happening because it's just like you're getting from one set piece to the next to the next to the next. That is one of the most rich works in his, if you want to look at like a political Rorschach test or whatever, that's the fucking movie. Like it's, and he does it all without 3 fucking hours of The Dark Knight Rises like Chris Nolan does, right? Like you want to tell you, like, it's a movie about civilization and about sexuality and all this stuff and he does it in what, like 90 minutes, right? And it's
I much prefer it to any Nolan film for sure.
yeah.
Put that on the box. All right, my third one. I'm gonna go into some things that we didn't talk about. His episode of Tales from the Crypt, Dead Weight, which stars Vanity, John Rhys Davies, Whoopi Goldberg, and James Remar, who's really fantastic in the role. It is. I went back and found the Tales from the Crypt comic it's based on. That thing is racist.
Oh yeah, a lot of them were.
Yeah, they were. Hooper, do not associate him with the comic. He does some amazing stuff.
He's
with short. The atmosphere of this is set in Haiti. Remar plays a thief that's trying to steal some kind of. The MacGuffin is this gemstone he's trying to steal from John Rhys Davies, who's a plantation owner. In fact, this film is really a commentary on American racism, colonial racism in Haiti, with Whoopi Goldberg as well. I won't spoil it.
But that alone, I think, is, again, Hooper the progressive. How do you get out in front of this, kind of racist source text or whatever? Well, you put Whoopi Goldberg in it, right? The most like public, other than Oprah, Black female entertainer. And like, what a coup at that point to get her as well. Her career was like crazy. You couldn't, every movie she made a ton of money.
And to get her away from, sort of the magical Black attendant role of ghost and things like that. Here, she is something far more in control, so highly recommend Dead Weight to people who haven't seen it. That was my third one, right? So my fourth one, I'm going to go with Toolbox Murders.
Hell yeah.
Which was kind of a return to feature-length filmmaking, still direct-to-video, still Jay Sanderson and Adam Gearsach. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. But again, with the atmosphere, the sort of puzzle box narrative of this mystery. There's another one of my favorite essays in our book is by Nina Martin, which is about Toolbox Murders, and it's sort of dialogue with the history of the occult in Hollywood. I can't recommend that one enough. And then, all right, so the final one I'll say is The Damned Thing, the episode of Masters of Horror, which I actually write about in the book. The obsolescent male, the breakdown of the family. There's a great interview in the DVD of the Masters of Horror series with Matheson Jr., who wrote both The Damned Thing and Dance of the Dead episodes, in which he talks about the symbolism of the oil monster, which is ridiculous and over the top, but also, right? Like as you were talking about earlier, the era of the Iraq War and the endless war on terrorism and the war for oil. If I may paraphrase the great philosopher Jello Biafra, "Die for oil, sucker." That's what's going on in this one. So a wide range. And then, all right, a bonus. He directed 4 segments of a TV series that you can find on YouTube and elsewhere called Night Visions, my favorite of which is called The Maze. He didn't have anything to do with the host segments, but it's hosted by Henry Rollins. And it's hilarious, man. Everybody check out those episodes of Night Visions that he did in 2002.
That was the start of Henry Rollins' I Need Work era.
It was after The Chase, but before the talk show. And
that's right.
Anytime your work can be associated with Henry Rollins, I think you go for it. Just so you can tell people, oh yeah, I did this thing.
Henry Rollins was there, yeah. That's
no big deal.
He was in Heat, so that's what we'll always have to give him that.
I prefer his star-making term in Johnny Mnemonic.
Of course, yes, famously. But it's I want to say, for the Damned Thing, that's I think that movie is wonderful, and that, like, going back to, again, this sort of cursed Southern setting, like this very purposeful Gothic thing, but also the idea of taking an Ambrose Bierce story, who was one of our most famous writers about the American Civil War. I believe he served, and doing that at the height of the Iraq War. It's just, it's you couldn't miss what he was trying to say if you wanted to.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that is a wonderful, wonderful bit of television, and he directs it in such this like beautiful, grotesque way that, like, it was like that's always why I knew, like, that's why he and Rob Zombie got along so well, is because their sensibility was taking this ironclad, Hollywood grammar and then pointing it at the most disgusting thing that you've ever seen, right? Like, and that's Damned Thing is as close to tonally probably a Rob Zombie movie that he ever made. And I think that there's a lot of Rob Zombie, like the two of them, their conversations and friendship kind of bleeds into Dance of the Dead and Damned Thing. And I love that. So I mean, like, I love Rob Zombie to pieces, and I also love that, like, Sherry Moon is in Toolbox Murders for a scene or two. They got along really nicely, and I always thought that was really, really touching, especially when you compare it to when John Carpenter, for instance, when he was remembering going to the Masters of Horror dinners and why he stopped going. It was like, I don't know, man, everybody there just so in love with themselves, and Eli Roth with his Hollywood hair, just not for me.
Well, I'm glad for the relationship that Hooper had with Zombie, although I'm also glad that Hooper would never have filmed a scene with Leatherface scored by Nazareth's Love Hurts. Something that I've never forgiven Rob Zombie for doing in his Halloween remake. It's just inappropriate, sir. There's
that's the thing. He respected Tobe Hooper, so he didn't remake Texas Chainsaw. He didn't really respect John Carpenter, so he didn't give a shit about that. And I don't think John Carpenter liked him at all. So
Michael Myers does not need a backstory. God damn it. Anyway, somebody needs to tell David Gordon Green as well. But no, they're all great. I mean, who am I?
I mean, I tend to agree with you about the new Halloween movies. Like, I love David Gordon Green still. I mean, obviously,
fantastic
whips, but
they're keeping the flames going, man. Love these.
Yeah, man. He's still very fucking interesting. I can't say that this is exactly the perfect funnel for him, but I still think his images are nice. So I don't think he's lost it. It's a weird cul-de-sac.
Weird cul-de-sac. That's where we're at.
That's where we are.
Hey man, I want to thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me back, dude. This is a blast.
Yeah, let's do something again sometime. To the audience, Cinemophagy on the psychedelic and classical form of Tobe Hooper. American Twilight, the cinema of Tobe Hooper. 2021, not much has happened this year, but at least we've gotten a couple of good books about Tobe Hooper, and hopefully this will open up the floodgates in both the academic and popular presses for more consideration of Hooper as a multifaceted artist who's worth a lot more than his admittedly incredible Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Scout, thanks again. Thanks to the University of Texas Press for hosting us, and everybody take care.